All right, we're now talking about the final few sections of Chapter 8 on the axial and appendicular skeleton for Section 10 of Chapter 8 for Bio 246. We're talking about the pelvis girdle and its functions now. You should be able to name the three bones that make up each Os Coxae after this section. Describe how the Os Coxae articulate with each femur and sacrum. Describe the landmarks and the features of an Os Coxae, and differentiate between the true and false pelvis. You should also be able to compare and contrast the pelvic inlet and the pelvic outlet. Compare and contrast the anatomy of the male versus the female pelvis, and describe changes to the Os Coxae as a person ages. So start with the pelvis. There are four bones: the sacrum, the coccyx, the right and the left Os Coxae. This supports the viscera in the inferior part of the ventral body cavity. The pelvic girdle is the left and right Os Coxae only. It articulates with the trunk. It provides the attachment point for the lower limbs, and it is angled slightly to the anterior when you're standing upright. The Os Coxae is the hip bone. It's composed of the ilium, the ischium, and the pubis. These bones fuse between the ages of 13 to 15 years, somewhere in that early puberty or potentially late puberty, all depending on when a child at first enters puberty. It articulates posteriorly with the sacrum at the sacroiliac or SI joint. Femur articulation is with at the acetabulum of that femur. There's a deep curved depression on the lateral Os Coxae, and that's the region where the three bones have fused. Okay? There's a C-shaped smooth surface on the acetabulum called the lunate surface. It articulates with the femoral head. The ilium is the largest of those three coxal bones. It forms the superior region of the Os Coxae. It forms part of the acetabular surface, and its wide and fan-shaped region is called the ala, or ala. And it terminates inferiorly at a ridge, the arcuate line on the medial surface of the ilium. And the ilium, there's a depression on the medial side, toward the middle side of the ala, called the iliac fossa. And it's the attachment sites here for the gluteal muscles at the ilium. On the lateral surface, the anterior, the posterior, and the inferior gluteal lines. At the auricular surface is where the ilium articulates with the sacrum on the posterior medial side. And the iliac crest is the superiormost ridge of the ilium. The ischium is the fusion with the ilium near the superior and posterior margins of the acetabulum. There's a triangular ischial spine that's posterior to the acetabulum. The ischial body is a bulky bone that's superior to the ischial spine with a lesser sciatic notch. And there's a semicircular depression inferior to the ischial spine. The ischial tuberosity is a roughened projection on the posterior lateral border of the ischium. It's called the sits, S-I-T-Z bones, sits bones, on your sits bones. People say that sometimes. It's where you bear the weight of body in your sitting position. And the ramus of the ischium extends from the ischial tuberosity toward the anterior fusion with the pubis. The pubis fuses with the ilium and the ischium at the acetabulum. The ramus of ischium fuses anteriorly with the inferior pubic ramus, and it forms the ischiopubic ramus. The superior pubic ramus originates at the anterior margin of the acetabulum, and the body of the pubis is between the superior and the inferior pubic rami. Obturator foramen is the space in the Os Coxae. It's encircled by the pubic and the ischial rami. The pubic crest has a roughed ridge. It's on the anterior superior portion of the superior pubic ramus. It ends in the pubic tubercle. The symphyseal surface is the site of articulation to the pubic bones. The pectineal line is originating across the pubis. It merges with the arcuate line. And then we see all these kind of come together here. So of course, this whole body being the pelvis, sacrum here, Os Coxae, one Os Coxa, the other Os Coxa, a coccyx, tailbone here, and then we have for the pelvis itself, the anterior view, we have the posterior superior iliac spine, iliac crest, the sacroiliac joint, SI joint, where the spine meets that pelvis there, and then we have the pelvic inlet here, the ilium, this primary body here, pubis, the ischium, okay, the ischiopubic ramus, the subpubic angle here. Pubic symphysis is a connection point right between the Os Coxa. And the obturator foramen is an open space here on each side. Pubic tubercle is here. Here. And the acetabulum is a place where that femoral head is going to meet the pelvis here. Ischial spine right in here. The anterior iliac spine here. It's more actually the front side, right? and the anterior superior iliac spine, and the sacroiliac joint again here. I mentioned that already. And let's take a look at the x-ray too. Oops. So we have the anterior view here of an x-ray here. So you can see the sacroiliac joint there, the pelvic inlet, the ischial tuberosity, pubic tubercle, the pubic symphysis, the lesser trochanter of the femur there, on the medial side there, the obturator foramen. Okay, the greater trochanter of that femur being here for the neck of the femur, and the greater trochanter here, head of the femur, femoral head, meeting up with that acetabulum of the pelvis here, referring to the hip joint there. Really wouldn't be fair to call just the pelvis by itself the hip. It's really the hip and the femur both comprising that hip, at least the hip joint. That said, take a little closer look here at the right os coxae. See the iliac crest of the os coxae here, the anterior gluteal line, the posterior gluteal line, and then a posterior superior iliac spine, posterior inferior iliac spine, greater sciatic notch, the anterior superior iliac spine, presenting this laterally, right? And the inferior gluteal line, the anterior inferior iliac spine, and the lunate surface of that acetabulum. And then we have the body of the ischium here, and the ischial spine, lesser sciatic notch, ischial tuberosity, a superior pubic ramus, pubic crest, pubic tubercle, and the body of the pubis, and the inferior pubic ramus, obturator foramen, and the ramus of the ischium. And the medial view, seeing it from the opposing side, seeing the same concepts here. I'm not going to go over them all exactly. You should be able to see them, but just flipping it essentially, right? But I'll leave it there for a moment for you if you want to take a moment to note anything or to quickly review the concepts to make sure you're getting these locations down. Pelvic brim is the continuous oval ridge of the pelvis there. It extends to the inferior edges of the sacral ala and the promontory, or the promontory process, some refer to it as, divides the pelvis into true and false pelvis. The true pelvis is inferior to the pelvic brim. It encloses the pelvic cavity and contains the pelvic organs. The false pelvis is superior to the pelvic brim and houses the inferior abdominal organs. So here we have the pelvis medial view with the false pelvis here. And we have the pelvic inlet, sacral promontory, true pelvis, okay? And then we have coccyx, the pelvic outlet. And so it's highlighting here the false pelvis here and the true pelvis here. So true pelvis, false pelvis, right? The pelvic inlet is superiorly positioned space enclosed by the pelvic brim. It marks the boundary between the true and false pelvis. The pelvic outlet is an inferiorly placed opening bounded by the coccyx, the ischial tuberosities, the inferior border of the symphyseal turf surface. It's covered with muscles and skin and forms the perineum. And the width and size is important in females. It must be wide enough to accommodate the fetal head, right, for childbirthing. So looking here at the male versus the female pelvis, so I'll bring it back out again in a second or two, but you can even just see the difference in size width-wise. Generally speaking, it's not true. There's no such thing as the same size for everyone, right? That being said, sacral promontory here, and then we have our basically our pelvic inlet here, pelvic outlet here, pubic symphysis, right? The ischial spine. You can see a much wider space for that pelvic inlet and for the pelvic outlet for the typical female pelvis, assuming that it's at maturity in this case here. And then, of course, this ischial spine located here and the pubic symphysis here. As far as determining the sex of the skeleton, the Os Coxae are the most sexually dimorphic bones. So due to demands of pregnancy and childbirth, you can actually determine a little more about what's going on in the skeleton based on taking a look at the pelvis. Female pelvis is shallower and wider. The females typically have wider hips due to female ilium flaring more laterally, and the female acetabulum projects more laterally as well. And the female pelvis has a greater sciatic notch, or greater width to the sciatic notch. Females have preocular sulcus. It's a depression between the greater sciatic notch and the sacroiliac articulation. The female sacrum is shorter and wider, not quite as tall, it's a little bit wider. The body of the pubis is longer and more rectangular shaped in women. The subpubic angle is when the pubic bones are aligned to the superficial surfaces, and it's wider and more convex in females. You can see a table in your textbook for more on that. Changes in Os Coxae. You can estimate the age at death based upon the size or the changes in the Os Coxae. And once that person can be examined, you can figure out how old they were to some extent. Based age-related changes you expect to see at the auricular surface of the ilium and at the superficial surface of the pubis. They're one of the most reliable indicators of age at the time of death. So what did you learn? What are the three bones fused to form the Os Coxae? What are the ischial tuberosities located? Where are they located? What's an alternative name for them, and what is their function? How is the pelvic inlet distinguished from the pelvic outlet? How do male and female pelvis differ with respect to the shape of the pubis, the subpubic angle, the greater sciatic notch, and the overall shape of the pelvis? And we'll talk about section 811 and 812 here shortly.